Hello there, and welcome to my 10.1.5 Shadow Priest guide. My old main, we're back again. Woo! So let me spout the decree of Shadow to you all. So let's take a look at stats. Right now I'm only 416, so you should be able to reach this eye level within like a few days of playing at max level, to be honest. With crafting gear, it's extremely easy, as well as the raid finder for 15 gear, for 11 gear, and the time rifts. You should easily be able to reach this eye level very quickly. And the stats you're looking for is going to be haste as your primary stat. You can see I have almost 5k haste, and then mastery. Those are the only two stats you care about. Crit and versatility means basically nothing. And the reason for that is that we are a dot spec. We have 3 damage over time effects that we want to keep up 100% of the time. We have Vampiric Touch, we have Shadowward Pain, and we have Devouring Plague. The reason we go for Master Secondary is because of how it interacts. A lot of our damage actually comes from like Devouring Plague, Mind Blast, and our Shadow Fiend in the current iteration of it. And Master makes it so for each of our 3 dots we have on our target, we gain, for me it's currently 15% additional damage, which means that just from having our base 2, which is going to be Vampiric Touch and Shadowward Pain, we deal 30% more damage. When we apply Devouring Plague, then it's suddenly 45% more damage. So even though we are dot class, our main purpose of our dots is just to give the rest of our toolkit as much damage as possible. So let's talk about class talents you want to pick up as Shadow Priest. Now, Shadow Priest don't have a lot of individual power nodes, so to speak. We get Shadow Fiend as baseline. We get our Execute, Shadowward Death. We get Death and Madness, so that during our Execute we can use our Execute twice before it goes on cooldown. We also pick up Tithe Evasion so that our Execute deals less damage to us afterwards. Then we have a slight increase to our Shadowward Pain and a slight benefit when something dies with our Shadowward Pain on it. Then we got Twist of Fate, which is just an pseudo execute mechanic we get where we just deal 10% more damage during execute phases. One of the last things we get is Halo. It's just a unhit, and we use it during our opener to make sure we generate 10 insanity as quickly as possible. Then we also pick up Mind Games, although Mind Games currently is one of our lowest priority damage spells. It is technically just something we use when we don't have anything else in our priority list. Lastly, as a offensive thing, we have Power Infusion, or PI. See, PI is sort of interesting because for the majority of situations, it will often be more beneficial for you to make sure that you PI a Warlock or an Unholy DK who benefits way more from the haste than we actually do. Now, I believe as a Shadow Priest, you still want to use it on cooldown or your own cooldowns. The reason why we use it on someone else is because we got Twins of the Percent Priestess so that we can grant them Power Infusion and still benefit from it ourselves. Most of our damage nodes will come from our Spec tree. Defensively, on a class tree, Shadow Priests don't really gain a whole lot. The first one being Fade. Fade is a 30-second cooldown that we can reduce by 10 seconds. So we get a 10% damage reduction from having Fade. Our other defensive measure is Protective Light, when we can use Flash Heal to give ourselves an additional 10% damage reduction. So we can have a short cooldown on demand 20% damage reduction whenever we need to. We also gain access to Vampiric Embrace, which is going to be your default in most raiding situations, simply because of how it interacts. It's just 12 seconds of us dealing damage and then healing for half of what we do as damage. Sanguine Teachings can sometimes be beneficial, but for the most part you will just stick with Vampiric Embrace. The last thing is that as a priest we naturally get access to Desperate Prayer as a defensive, which is just an increase to our maximum health for a short amount, and it also heals us. It's not the best sort of defensive, but it's what we have and it's alright, I guess. Lastly, we have Utility as a Shadow Priest. We actually gain quite a decent chunk of utility as a Shadow Priest outside of like Vampiric Embrace, Halo, which actually technically also heals. We gain Power Infusion, big DPS cooldown, very beneficial to other players. We also gain access to Master Spell. Master Spell is incredibly potent and powerful, and is something you will always pick up as a Shadow Priest because it is extremely helpful in most situations. Outside of that, you also get access to Leap of Fate, which can pull someone to a safe spot in case they are in a bad position. Of course, if you are in the correct position. We also gain access to Angelic Feather, so that we can actually give movement speed to ourselves or to other people. Lastly, we also pick up Dispel Magic, which is so we can remove a magic effect from a single target. It's sort of handy, but for the most part, we just pick it up for pathing. It's usually not something you have to worry about too much. Lastly, you have a choice node here between Void Shift, which can technically save a wipe if you use it on a tank who's about to die, or you can pick up Essence Devourer if you are playing the Mindbender build, which is currently the strongest build we have. If you don't pick up either of these, the default choice is going to be Angelic Bulwark, where if you're low HP, you can instantly gain 50% of your max health as an absorb shield. Now going over to the Spec tree, there are some nodes that we will always pick up. We'll always pick up Devouring Plague and Shadow Apparitions, as well as Misery. We will also have to pick up our Silence, which is a 45-second interrupt, and our main defensive, which is going to be Dispersion. So currently there are two different versions to play Shadow Priest. It all depends on this choice node. Either you play with Dark Ascension, which is technically the strongest pick at the moment, or you can play with Void Eruption. Now, the choice of this playstyle highly depends on your own profile and playstyle. Dark Ascension is a bit more turrety, so you don't have as much movement throughout your cooldowns, where Void Eruptions you gain access to Void Bolt, which can be quite helpful with high movement intensive fights. The difference between Void Eruption and Dark Ascension is only a few percentage, so it's not gonna make or break it depending on whichever you choose. Outside of these, you have a choice of playing with Mind Spike or playing without Mind Spike. Now, this is for the most part up to personal preference. However, if you decide not to want to play with Mind Spike, I will showcase a talent build for Mind Flay afterwards. In pure single target scenarios, you will also pick up Distorted Reality. Distorted Reality makes it so that our Devouring Plagues last 12 seconds rather than 6 seconds. Now, if you recall our mastery, this just makes it that we have 100% uptime, or close to 100% uptime on our Devouring Plague. You will also always pick up Void Torrent and Idol of Cthulhu. Idol of Cthulhu is without a doubt our strongest single point capstone or endpoint node, or whatever you want to call it. And we will always pick this up regardless of AoE single target, if you're playing Dark Ascension or you want to play Void Form, or if you play Mind Spike or Mind Flay. With the current Dark Ascension build, we are actually playing with Mindbender. This is quite similar to how we used to play back in Shadowlands with Inescapable Torment, which was our primary legendary we would go for. So that whenever we use Mind Blast or Shadow Word Death, our Mindbender would then teleport and deal AoE damage and increasing the duration of it. This is going to be a very reminiscent playstyle of how we played in Shadowlands. If you want instead to play with Void Eruption, still go Idol of Cthulhu, or then you go from having a Mindbender, we go into having Idol of Yogg-Saron. The reason for this is that thanks to Void Eruption, we gain access to Void Bolt. Void Bolt generates more shadow apparitions. Idol of Yogg-Saron spawns a Thing from Beyond of 25 stacks of void apparitions. So you can see, getting more shadow apparitions via Void Bolt, we gain more things from below. Now, our single target priority is actually quite simple for the core rotation of how we play this current spec, right? We want to keep up Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain. Thanks to the talent Misery, casting Vampiric Touch also applies Shadow Word Pain, so we actually don't need to apply both of them. Our Shadow Word Pain has a chance to give us an instant cast Mind Blast. This is one of our highest priority ones. We want to, in theory, never be sitting on 2 stacks of Mind Blast. Always want to have them. Now, once we're in execute phase, or if we get the execute damage proc, we want to just use our Shadow Word Death. As you can see, I took a bit of damage due to Shadow Word Death. That's not too bad of a thing because Devouring Plagues actually heals us. Whenever we've used a Devouring Plague, we have our Mind Spike Insanity. Mind Spike Insanity is just a beefed up version of our natural Mind Spike. So what you want to do throughout a standard rotation without using Mindbender and our Dark Ascension is we want to just keep up Vampiric Touch. We want to make sure we don't cap our Mind Blast charges. If it's in execute range, we want to execute, use it twice, and then build up to a Devouring Plague use Devouring Plague, and then Void Torrent. And then it's just using our empowered Mind Spikes and keeping Mind Blast on cooldown. And then if we have used all the things, we don't have any empowered Mind Spikes, we don't have Execute, we don't have enough for our Devouring Plague, you want to apply a Mind Games. The only time you want to use Mind Games is when you don't have enough Insanity for Devouring Plague, you don't have any Mind Blast charges, and you don't have Execute, and you don't have a powered up Mind Spike. So it's very, very low on our priority list. So it's actually quite simple when you break it down. Now, during our cooldowns, we change our priorities a little bit because we are playing with Mindbender and we are playing with Inescapable Torment. This means that we will use our Execute even outside of Execute, but simply to extend the duration of Mindbender. So how you want to do that is that you want to go Mindbender and then Dark Ascension, Blast, Death. And then try to get as many Mind Blasts and Shadow Wave Death into your Mindbender as possible. Here is how we would actually open as a Shadow Priest. If you were talented into Shadow Crash, which we are in AoE, this would be how we would pull with Shadow Crash because it has a travel time. If you don't have Shadow Crash, you want to start out with casting Vampiric Touch so that it hits on 0. Sometimes you can get out a Halo before going Vampiric Touch. So let's say on pull it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Halo, Vampiric Touch, Mindbender, Dark Ascension, Power Infusion with all your trinkets, Mind Blast, Vampiric, Devouring Plague, Void Torrent, into a new Devouring Plague, and then you would go Mind Spike Insanity, Mind Blast, Mind Spike, Mind Blast, and then Mind Games as the very last thing. It's important to note that you just want to use your Mind Games while you still have Devouring Plague up. But after you're outside of your opener, it's just about maintaining your uptime on your Vampiric Touch and Devouring Plague. Make sure you don't overcap on Mind Blast charges. Use Halo as close to on cooldown as you can. And then make sure you use Mindbender and Dark Ascension on cooldown as well. And that's your opener, a Shadow Priest and single target. When we talk about our AoE rotation, it is pretty much our single target. The reason for this is that we are having this talent called Psychic Link. This makes it so we deal 15% of our single target damage to all other targets that have Vampiric Touch within 40 yards. We pick up Shadow Crash. Now, Shadow Crash is amazing for Shadow Priest AoE. You just need to learn how to play with it. It has a travel time, so you need to take that into account. Shadow Crash applies Vampiric Touch to 8 targets that it deals damage to. Because of Misery, this means that we also apply Shadow Wave Pain to our 8 targets. The final note we'll pick up is Idol of Insolve. Now, if you played during Battle for Azeroth and the final patch with all the corruption gear, this might sound very reminiscent to you because this is exactly like Echoing Void was back then. Basically, our main 2 dots, Shadow Wave Pain and Vampiric Touch, have a chance to apply Echoing Void up to 4 targets. Every time Echoing Void is applied, it has a chance to consume a stack and just continuously consume all stacks and deal AoE damage. If an enemy dies with this Echoing Void on them, all the stacks will be removed instantly and deal that damage in AoE. For the main part of our AoE rotation, it is like bread and butter, the exact same as our single target, however we just apply it with our Shadow Crash, and then you can see that we have actually just more of our shadow apparitions going out everywhere. Honestly, our AoE rotation is completely the same as our single target, which makes life so much easier. But yeah, anyways, that was all from me. Hopefully you'll subscribe, and we'll see you all in the next one. Bye!